Measure yourself only against your former self. This is the discipline that liberates the mind from restless rivalry and returns it to sovereign ground. When you compare your path to another's, you abandon the only terrain you are meant to cultivate. But when you compare yourself to who you were yesterday, you step into a contest that refines rather than corrodes. Your past self is the only rival appointed to you by nature. That earlier version of you carried certain fears, habits, hesitations, and limits. It also carried potential. Each day presents a quiet inquiry. Have you sharpened your understanding, steadied your temper, strengthened your resolve? This inquiry does not accuse. It clarifies. It does not breed envy. It cultivates accountability. Yet their soil, storms, and seasons differ from yours. You are not shaped by identical circumstances, nor entrusted with identical responsibilities. To measure yourself against your former self is to refine the instrument. Consider the small victories that often go unnoticed. Yesterday, you reacted in anger. Today, you paused before speaking. Yesterday, you delayed your duty. Today, you acted without hesitation. Yesterday, you doubted your capacity. Today, you attempted what once intimidated you. These increments may appear modest, but they signify transformation. Progress is not forged in spectacle, but in repetition. There is dignity in gradual advancement. Its growth is not a betrayal of its former state, but the fulfillment of it. In the same way, your earlier weaknesses are not stains to conceal. They are foundations upon which strength is constructed. When you surpass your former ignorance with insight, your former impulsiveness with restraint, you honor the journey rather than deny it. To measure yourself against your former self demands honesty. It requires that you remember who you were without embellishment. It invites you to examine patterns, confront excuses, and acknowledge improvement without vanity. This form of comparison is rooted in truth, not illusion. It does not inflate the ego, nor does it wound it unnecessarily. It asks only for alignment between intention and action. Even then, the measure remains personal. If you have fallen, ask whether you rise more swiftly than before. If you have erred, ask whether your understanding deepens through the error. Growth is not the absence of failure, but the refinement of response. When your standard is your former self, discipline acquires meaning. Effort becomes intimate. You are no longer performing for applause or competing for recognition. You are engaged in craftsmanship, shaping your character with deliberate strokes. Each choice becomes material. Each habit becomes architecture. This practice also guards against complacency. If yesterday you were courageous, do not assume today requires less vigilance. The former self can become stagnant if unchallenged. Therefore, the comparison is not sentimental. It is exacting. It asks whether you are expanding your capacity for patience, clarity, fortitude. It asks whether comfort has replaced aspiration. At the same time, this measure cultivates compassion toward yourself. You recognize the distance you have traveled. You cease condemning yourself for not being where another stands, and instead appreciate the terrain you have crossed. Self-respect emerges from effort recognized, not from superiority claimed. There is serenity in this approach. When your benchmark is internal, the noise of external rivalry diminishes. Another's promotion, talent, or acclaim does not disturb your equilibrium, because your gaze is directed inward and forward. You are not concerned with overtaking them. You are concerned with refining yourself. Your peace no longer depends on relative position, but on authentic progress. This discipline fosters resilience. The world may fluctuate in its judgments, offering praise one moment and criticism the next. If your standard lies in surpassing your former limitations, these fluctuations lose their authority. You evaluate yourself by integrity of effort, not by the applause of observers. In this way, you become less fragile, less reactive, more steadfast. To measure yourself only against your former self is to reclaim ownership of your journey. It transforms life from a spectacle into a practice. It replaces envy with intention, anxiety with focus, rivalry with mastery. You become both student and teacher, critic, and craftsman. Each day you confront the question, am I wiser than I was, steadier than I was, more disciplined than I was? And in pursuing an honest answer, you refine the one life entrusted to you. Another's success does not diminish your purpose. As though glory were bread, and each triumph consumed by another leaves, you starved. Yet purpose is not rationed. It is an inward directive, independent of applause and untouched by comparison. When you witness another rising, receiving recognition, gathering wealth, or demonstrating talent, the immediate impulse may be contraction. A subtle tightening of the chest, a quiet whisper suggesting that their ascent casts a shadow upon your own path. But reflect carefully. How can their accomplishment subtract from what you are called to become? Your field remains entirely yours to till. It is vast, layered, abundant in opportunity for excellence expressed in countless forms. One person may command a room with eloquence. Another may endure patiently. Each contribution arises from a distinct composition of strengths, trials, and circumstances. To assume that another's prominence invalidates your own direction is to misunderstand the diversity of purpose. It persuades you that recognition is finite, that admiration is limited, that significance must be seized before another claims it. Yet consider nature. The sky does not restrict its brilliance to a single star. Abundance exists not in identical roles, but in varied expressions of excellence. Another's success can even illuminate your path, if perceived rightly. Instead of interpreting it as a threat, regard it as evidence of possibility. Their achievement demonstrates what dedication, perseverance, and clarity can produce. It does not declare your inadequacy. It reveals what disciplined effort can yield. The response then shifts from resentment to inquiry. What qualities can you cultivate within yourself? What capacities remain dormant, awaiting refinement? Your purpose is anchored in your character, not in comparison. It resides in the responsibilities uniquely entrusted to you, in the relationships you influence, in the talents you have been given to steward. No external accomplishment can revoke this responsibility. Even if another surpasses you in skill or acclaim, your obligation to act with integrity, to strive for improvement, to contribute meaningfully remains unchanged. When you internalize this truth, you are freed from corrosive rivalry. You can celebrate others without diminishing yourself. You can admire excellence without feeling eclipsed. Their triumph becomes a testament to human potential rather than a verdict on your limitations. In this state, admiration replaces jealousy, and inspiration replaces insecurity. It is also essential to recognize that success is multifaceted. What appears as triumph from afar may carry burdens unseen. Recognition often accompanies scrutiny. Wealth can invite pressure. Influence may demand sacrifice. To envy the visible reward without understanding the invisible cost is to evaluate incompletely. Every achievement carries its own weight. You are not privy to the entirety of another's journey, nor to the sacrifices embedded within their ascent. Your purpose, meanwhile, unfolds through your specific trials. The obstacles you face, the constraints you endure, the setbacks you navigate. These are not signs of exclusion from significance. They are instruments shaping resilience and discernment. Another's smoother path does not invalidate the depth forged by your struggles. Different journeys produce different strengths. Guard also against defining success solely by external markers. Titles, wealth, recognition, these are transient indicators. They fluctuate with circumstance and opinion. Purpose, however, is sustained through consistent alignment with your principles. If you act with discipline when tempted by ease, if you speak truth when silence would be convenient, if you fulfill duties even when unnoticed, your purpose remains intact regardless of another's accolades. In moments when comparison attempts to unsettle you, return to what is within your control. You cannot dictate another's rise, nor should you attempt to impede it. You can govern your effort, your learning, your response. The energy spent resenting another's progress is energy withdrawn from your own advancement. Redirect it inward, toward refinement rather than rivalry. Understand that multiple individuals can thrive simultaneously without negating one another. Excellence is not exclusive. Growth is not competitive by necessity. The flourishing of another does not constrict your potential. It simply represents a different expression of it. When this perspective becomes habitual, you move through the world with composure, confident that your path retains meaning independent of external comparisons. Comparison distorts judgment and weakens reason. It begins subtly, almost imperceptibly, as a glance toward another's position, possessions, or praise. Yet, what starts as observation quickly mutates into evaluation, and evaluation into self-condemnation, or inflated pride. In either case, clarity dissolves. The mind that once perceived things plainly becomes clouded by illusion. Reason is the faculty that distinguishes what is within your control from what is not, what is essential from what is trivial, what is enduring from what is fleeting. Comparison unsettles this faculty. It persuades you to measure your interior, state against another's exterior display. You begin to value symbols over substance, appearances over principles. A quiet life appears inferior to a celebrated one. Steady progress seems insignificant beside dramatic success. Judgment becomes warped because it no longer rests upon truth but upon spectacle. When you compare, you rarely compare wholes. You isolate fragments. You see another's achievement without their fatigue, their confidence without their doubt, their reward without their discipline. You construct a partial image and treat it as complete. This selective perception corrupts discernment. You are reacting not to reality, but to a curated impression. Reason cannot function properly when fed incomplete evidence. Moreover, comparison shifts your standard from internal to external. Instead of asking whether your actions align with your values, you ask whether they surpass another's. This shift is subtle yet destructive. It makes virtue relative. Integrity becomes negotiable. Effort becomes strategic rather than sincere. You no longer strive to act rightly. You strive to appear superior. The compass that once directed you inward now spins wildly, influenced by every visible success around you. The distortion also affects emotional equilibrium. If another advances, you feel diminished. If another falters, you feel elevated. Your sense of worth becomes tethered to circumstances beyond your governance. Reason loses authority because your mood dictates your conclusions. You interpret events not through measured analysis, but through wounded pride or fleeting triumph. There is also a danger in favorable comparison. When you judge yourself superior, complacency seeps in. You underestimate the need for continued growth. You measure your progress not against excellence, but against the perceived weakness of others. This weakens discipline. It softens vigilance. It tempts you to stagnate under the illusion of adequacy. Comparison narrows perception. Instead of viewing life as a vast landscape of varied paths, you reduce it to a competitive track. Every interaction becomes a silent contest. Every accomplishment is weighed against someone else's. The richness of individual purpose fades, replaced by constant calculation. The mind becomes restless, scanning for evidence of ranking rather than meaning. Reason thrives in stillness and objectivity. It requires space to evaluate circumstances without emotional turbulence. Comparison agitates this stillness. It introduces noise. You replay conversations, reinterpret gestures, exaggerate differences. You become preoccupied with status rather than substance. In this state, decisions are rarely wise because they are rarely grounded. Furthermore, comparison often leads to misdirected ambition. You pursue goals not because they resonate with your nature, but because they are admired. You adopt aspirations that belong to others. In doing so, you estrange yourself from authenticity. The pursuit may yield recognition, yet internally, it breeds dissatisfaction because it was never aligned with your true disposition. When reason weakens, impulses gain strength. Envy urges imitation. Pride invites arrogance. Insecurity provokes overcompensation. Each reaction distances you further from measured judgment. Instead of acting deliberately, you react reflexively. Instead of assessing calmly, you assume hastily. To preserve reason, you must guard your perceptions. Observe others without attaching your worth to their outcomes. Recognize that their path unfolds according to factors distinct from yours. Evaluate your actions based on principles rather than proximity to someone else's achievements. When you remove comparison, your mind regains balance. You see efforts as efforts, setbacks as lessons, progress as personal rather than competitive. Clarity returns when you cease distorting the lens. You begin to discern what truly matters: the integrity of your conduct, the consistency of your discipline, the refinement of your character. These measures are stable because they depend upon your choices. They do not fluctuate with another's fortune. A rational mind is a steady instrument. It assesses without exaggeration, responds without panic, advances without envy. Comparison corrodes this steadiness. It introduces bias where neutrality is needed, emotion where discernment is required. To protect your reason, you must refuse to anchor your judgment in another's narrative and instead anchor it in deliberate reflection upon your own conduct and principles. Master what is within your control, release what is not. This principle is the dividing line between tranquility and turmoil. Much of human suffering arises not from events themselves, but from the insistence that events conform to personal preference. We attempt to command outcomes, orchestrate perceptions. Within your control reside your judgments, your intentions, your effort, your discipline, your response. These are sovereign territories. No external force can compel your consent without your participation. You may be confronted with insult, yet the interpretation of that insult belongs to you. You may encounter hardship, yet the manner in which you meet it remains your decision. Between stimulus and response lies the domain of mastery. Outside your control dwell the opinions of others, the fluctuations of fortune, the timing of opportunity, the recognition of your labor, the unpredictable turns of circumstance. These are governed by forces beyond your direction, other minds, external systems, the unfolding of events. To attempt to dominate them is to wage war against reality itself. The confusion arises when these two realms are entangled. You begin to measure your peace by outcomes rather than by effort. You tether your composure to approval, your confidence to praise, your security to stability that may vanish without warning. When the external shifts, as it inevitably does, your equilibrium fractures. Mastery begins with discernment. Ask. If it does not, relinquish your grip. This relinquishment is not passivity. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that energy is finite and must be invested where it yields transformation. Consider criticism. You cannot govern another's tongue, but you can govern your reaction. You can examine whether the critique contains truth and adjust accordingly. If it is unfounded, you can dismiss it without internalizing its venom. The external expression remains outside your command. The internal interpretation does not. Consider ambition. You may labor diligently toward a goal. If you define success solely by attainment, you expose yourself to despair. If you define success by the integrity of your effort, you preserve dignity regardless of result. There is immense freedom in releasing what is not yours to command. Anxiety diminishes when you cease attempting to forecast every possibility. Resentment softens when you accept that others operate according to their own perceptions. Impatience fades when you recognize that timing unfolds independent of your urgency. This does not mean indifference toward outcomes. It means proportional concern. Care deeply about the quality of your contribution. Care less about the applause it receives. Accept calmly the verdict that follows. When you anchor your satisfaction in the excellence of your effort, you become less vulnerable to external volatility. Control over self requires discipline. It demands vigilance over thoughts that drift toward complaint or blame. It requires restraint when impulses surge. It invites deliberate action rather than reactive outburst. This internal governance is not effortless. It is cultivated through repetition. Each moment presents an opportunity to practice. Releasing what is not within your control also refines humility. You recognize the vast interplay of factors shaping events. You cease imagining yourself the architect of every outcome. This perspective tempers arrogance in success and softens bitterness. In failure, you become steadier because your identity is no longer inflated by victory nor shattered by defeat. When confronted with uncertainty, focus on preparation rather than prediction. When faced with delay, concentrate on refinement rather than frustration. When encountering rejection, strengthen resilience rather than resentment. Each of these responses resides within your domain. The mind often resists this division because it craves certainty. It seeks guarantees. Yet certainty regarding outcomes is rarely available. What is always available is the opportunity to choose your posture. You can choose composure over agitation, persistence over surrender, integrity over compromise. By mastering what lies within and releasing what lies beyond, you conserve strength. Your energy is no longer dissipated in futile resistance. It is concentrated, directed, purposeful. You become less reactive to circumstance and more responsive through principle. External chaos may persist, but internal order remains intact. This order is not accidental. It is maintained through continuous awareness of the boundary between what you can shape and what you must accept. True progress is growth in virtue, not superiority over others. Virtue depends on character. One is unstable, contingent upon. The other is internal, constructed deliberately through disciplined thought and action. There will always be another who is wealthier, stronger, more celebrated, more gifted. If your advancement depends upon outranking them, you will live in perpetual tension. Even victory will taste uncertain because it must be defended. Superiority is a shifting pedestal. It trembles under the slightest change in circumstance. Virtue, by contrast, does not compete. It refines. It asks not whether you stand above another, but whether you stand firmly within your principles. Whether your decisions reflect justice, whether your endurance demonstrates courage, whether your desires are governed by moderation. These are measures no external rival can diminish. Consider the nature of wisdom. It is the quiet ability to discern what is essential, to speak when necessary, to remain silent when restraint is wiser. A person may surpass you in academic recognition, yet lack clarity in judgment. It is not mere boldness in public arenas, nor theatrical displays of confidence. Another may appear more daring, but if your actions arise From principled conviction rather than fear, you are advancing. Justice, too, defines authentic growth. In resisting the temptation to exploit advantage at another's expense, superiority seeks dominance. Justice seeks balance. When you choose equity over personal gain, you fortify character. This fortification does not depend upon applause. Moderation tempers desire. In a culture that glorifies accumulation and visibility, moderation appears modest, yet it preserves clarity. Growth in moderation strengthens autonomy, shielding you from the turbulence of insatiable craving. Superiority is outward-facing. Virtue is inward-forming. One seeks validation. The other seeks alignment. When you prioritize virtue, your focus shifts from outperforming others to refining yourself. You begin to evaluate days not by how impressive they appeared, but by how honorably they were lived. If your aim is superiority, failure humiliates. It signals loss of rank. If your aim is virtue, failure instructs. It reveals weaknesses requiring attention. The setback becomes material for improvement rather than evidence of inadequacy. Thus, adversity contributes to progress instead of obstructing it. Moreover, superiority breeds isolation. It positions others as competitors to be surpassed. It allows admiration without envy and collaboration without insecurity. When you do not require others to be beneath you, you are free to learn from them. It may not attract recognition. You may become more patient in conversation, more disciplined in routine, more generous in spirit. These changes may escape public notice, yet they reshape your character. Over time, they influence your decisions, your relationships, your influence. The cumulative effect of small virtuous acts surpasses the fleeting satisfaction of being declared superior. Superiority is vulnerable to reversal. Fortune shifts, skills decline, circumstances evolve. What once distinguished you may become common. Virtue, however, deepens with practice. It is not eroded by another's ascent. It strengthens through repetition and reflection. 2. Pursue virtue requires honesty. It demands that you confront your motives. Are you striving to appear admirable or to be admirable? Are you refining your character when unseen or only when observed? These questions sharpen awareness. When you embrace virtue as you no longer race frantically against others. You walk deliberately toward integrity. Each day offers opportunities to practice patience instead of irritation, courage instead of avoidance, fairness instead of selfishness. In time, you recognize that superiority offers fleeting triumph, while virtue offers enduring strength. The former dazzles briefly, the latter fortifies permanently. One depends upon comparison, the other depends upon commitment. Let them measure worth by rank and recognition. You, instead, cultivate clarity, resilience, fairness, and restraint. In doing so, you construct a life that does not collapse when applause fades. You anchor your progress in qualities that cannot be stolen, overshadowed, or diminished. 4. The highest form of advancement is not standing above another, but standing firmly within yourself. And no external victory can equal the quiet strength you carry within.